Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back, and today we are talking Death Guard faction focus from the Warhammer community article, specifically here the army rule and detachment rule showcased in that post. There will be future videos on the data cards that we've seen for the units and the profiles therein, but for now we're focusing just on the core rules that will apply to the army on release. Now, as a high level first, the army rule is the rule that will affect the faction, broadly speaking, regardless of which detachment you might select. And so this might change through balanced data slates across the edition, but this is broadly the way, the identity of the faction, the way we would expect them to play across the edition. The detachment rule, on the other hand, is selected at the list building stage. We don't know if we will only receive this one faction rule on release or whether there will be other options, but the understanding is that when the codex comes out, that will release multiple detachment rules for us to select between so that we can pick one that matches our preferred playstyle rather than having the limited one or few options from the index release. So let's dive in here with the army rule. The army rule is Nurgle's gift, and it is very similar to Contagions of Nurgle in 9th. One key difference there is that it is listed as an aura, where in 9th Contagions of Nurgle explicitly was not an aura. The wording here, if your army faction is Death Guard, while an enemy unit is within contagion range of this unit, subtract 1 from the toughness characteristics of models in that enemy unit. Contagion range changes over the course of the battle, as shown below. So it starts out Battle Round 1 at 3 inch, Battle Round 2 at 6 inch, Battle Round 3 onwards at 9 inch. Starting with the positives then, this is a turn ahead of where we would be in 9th edition with Contagions of Nurgle. Getting 3, 6, 9 would occur across turns 2, 3 and 4 onwards, where it's now 1, 2 and 3 onwards. So it is that bit easier to have an opponent either with no option but to enter contagion range, or yourself in a position to move and get them in contagion range. So that is a nice boon, an upgrade if you like, from where it was in 9th edition. On top of that, the fact that it is now an aura suggests that there is some interaction with auras, whether that be from enemy characters, models, whatever, being able to diminish auras in some way, or, as I am more hopeful of, that Death Guard characters, whether they're HQs or Fetid Virions, can benefit auras in some way, and by having Nurgle's gift be an aura, that it would carry over to Nurgle's gift, as well as any other auras that it might be present for an effect. So, whilst on face value this doesn't seem awfully potent, there may be other data sheets that we've yet to see that will increase the potency of this ability. Now, -1 toughness in a vacuum is still potent. It's still a good effect, particularly against infantry, where we're talking a baseline characteristic of toughness 3 to 5, possibly 6, as we've seen for the Blightlord Terminators. -1 on that is a significant reduction. Bearing in mind, if we're focusing on trying to get 2s to wound, the -1 toughness is effectively a -2 on the upper limit required to wound on 2s, because that requires being double the strength of the enemy's toughness characteristic. So reducing an Eldar from toughness 3 to toughness 2 means that 2s to wound goes from strength 6 to strength 4. It's a -2 reduction in that way. So into infantry, it's very potent still, and I think it will serve the Death Guard well into infantry engagements. But because the breadth of toughness characteristics across units in the game has broadened up to toughness 14, I believe we've seen, but we could even see higher than that, -1 toughness on those units isn't likely to be as potent. Reducing something from toughness 14 to toughness 13 doesn't dramatically affect any breakpoints that we've seen so far, and I don't expect it to affect a breakpoint at all if we're specifically talking 14 to 13. So whilst, yes, it should still be potent into infantry, it's losing a lot of its efficacy into those large monsters and vehicles. And given that that is true across the game broadly, we're probably going to be wounding those bigger, tougher units on 6s or 5s, where we might have been 5s or 4s previously. That feels like a double down hurt to the Death Guard, who are trying to manipulate that range. On top of that, we're not seeing key words like, namely, disgustingly resilient. So it looks like we've lost the -1 toughness effect and probably don't have a replacement for it. But on top of that, things like bolted discipline, inexorable advance look to be gone as well. Inexorable advance was one way that the Death Guard could look to gain some amount of movement over the opponent, who would suffer against difficult terrain unless they could fly. That having gone means that if we see difficult terrain reducing movement, that Death Guard will be interminably slow over it unless there's some other rule that comes out about it. Overall there, it in a vacuum doesn't seem particularly strong into the way that the game has shaped up, particularly around toughness characteristics. It also doesn't seem particularly strong in comparison to other army rules, namely Marines, which look like they're going to be up there around the top tier, if not the strongest. Being able to re-roll everything into a given target essentially is a license to remove them from the game, and this really isn't anywhere near that level of power. So for me, it seems like losing a lot more than we've gained, and really only gaining a slight bit of range and the chance that there are rules that benefit auras and therefore benefit Nurgle's gift. The detachment rule is spread the sickness. If you control an objective marker at the end of your command phase and a Death Guard unit from your army is within range of that objective marker, which would need to be the case for you to control it from the off, that objective marker is said to be infected and remains under your control even if you have no models in range of it, until your opponent controls it at the start or end of any turn. In addition, while an objective marker is infected and under your control, it has the Nurgle's gift ability as if it were a unit from your army, so enemies within contagion range will have their toughness characteristic modified. On face value, not a terrible thing to have for a slow army, because once you're committed to moving up the board, you're not necessarily able to come back and look to fight for that objective again, so leaving the opponent in the position where they do have to come and claim it to stop you scoring points at least offers some element of control over what the opponent will need to do to combat your game plan. But that's a dual-edged sword there. If you do choose to move away from an objective, safe in the knowledge that you will still be scoring points off it, it's very difficult to then consolidate back on that objective if you don't have some of the faster units in the codex still on the battlefield. And that gives the opponent a clear game plan of remove the drones, remove Mortarion, which they probably would have wanted to anyway, and that means that you can no longer rely on quickly skitting back to an objective to fight the opponent off, ready to capture it again. So inherently, your safest way to remain in control of objectives is still to remain on them, and if you do choose to go out onto another objective, you're probably not getting back to the original one in a hurry. The opponent only needs to control it at the start or end of any turn, meaning that if there is a fight on there that doesn't go as planned and you do lose more models than the opponent did, they may well just take it straight back off you at the end of their turn. If that's not the case, and like Necrons, they could respawn some Necron warriors with a good objective control stat, that at the start of their turn wouldn't necessarily take it off you in terms of the infection, but they would still take the objective back through the objective control mechanic. Whilst, yes, that means they'll probably be suffering the -1 toughness still, If you're on the objective, they would have anyway, and if you're not on the objective, you're not likely to get back there in a hurry, and so it's only really shooting attacks that they're suffering the penalty for, and there's nothing to suggest that Death Guard are going to be a shooting-focused faction, just inherently. Of course, you could build a list that way. So none of this here feels like it's offering you a significant advantage. On top of that, there are many battle line units we've seen so far that essentially have this written in as an ability. And given how broadly it's been written in, it to me seems like this could have been a keyword and shouldn't really have been a detachment rule. Overall, it's very underwhelming, and if there is another option as a detachment rule from the get-go, I firmly believe this will not be picked. As soon as the codex comes out, if this is the only detachment rule at launch, it will be a significant spike in power if it does literally anything else as a detachment rule in any of the given detachments. This is essentially Infected Remains, which was a relic in 9th edition available to the first company, Harbingers. And even on the Terminus Est Assault Force, it was never taken. It just doesn't do enough. Best case, you're stood at the back end of the objective, and the objective has your contagion range, so it's essentially offering a 3-inch increase. But to get any value out of it, you still have to be able to attack the opponent, and if that means that they're entering the contagion because they have the objective control points to remove you from that objective, you've already lost a significant benefit controlling the objective for the upside of them now being in contagion, and it's likely to take you your turn to fight them off it, because it's not really in the opponent's interest to run into one of your units if odds are it will kill them. So for me, it's a very difficult sell here. The army rule isn't offering any significant efficiency across the breadth of the profiles we've seen, only really having much impact against infantry, and Spread the Sickness is so widely available in terms of sticky objectives that doesn't feel like a great boon just to have it on things like drones. And on top of that, adding the additional contagion range, I just don't think in practice is going to do that much. By the time the opponent has got onto the objective, it's gone anyway, and you're left needing to scrabble back onto the objective or get near them to actually have that -1 toughness. And there's nothing to say that that unit even cares if it's a Land Raider, for example. Just as a comparison against Marines here, versus Marines, you're -1 toughness if you come near us, but they have a license to destroy 5 units with impunity across the game, as long as the majority, if not some of their army, can see it with full rerolls to hit and wound. At a detachment level, we have sticky objectives, but we don't really have that much that's quick enough to consolidate onto it if you are able to come in and score or capture the objective, thus removing its infection. Whilst the Marines have 3 active buffs that circumvent 3 major limitations built into the rules: being able to advance and shoot with the whole army for 1 turn at no penalty, being able to fall back, shoot and charge with the whole army for a turn at no penalty, and being able to advance and charge with the whole army for a turn at no penalty. For me, this just is a gulf of power difference. The only way that can be even now, at this stage, I see, is that Death Guard are pointed far lower than you would otherwise expect them to be, also being Marines. You would expect them to be point costed similarly to Loyalist Marines and Chaos Marines alike. If they are considerably cheaper, it starts to put Death Guard into a sort of hoardy position where you're running far more models than you would otherwise expect to for a Marine list. So I don't particularly see that as a likely outcome. The alternative would be that the Fetid Virion and the characters just add monumentally powerful buffs at a great cost per unit or per model, and so they even out what we're not getting in army rules and detachment rules by adding on top of those throughout the game. If this objective is infected, and an enemy walks onto it, they take D3 mortals, or something like that, as long as this unit is also on the objective. It counteracts the fact that you can walk away from it by forcing you to be on it, but it would be something that would add to making you want to infect an objective and be near it and have the opponent walk onto it, and then they take some damage and then you fight them off. I'm just spitballing there, but that's the sort of thing I could see happening, and it might make up the difference. But on face value, the power level for Death Guard looks to be the lowest that we've seen so far, and that isn't a great place to be as a Death Guard player. The Codex will certainly add something, though it remains to be seen as to what, but it can't make us any weaker than this by my estimations. So not a glowing review of Death Guard straight out of the gates for 10th, but the points, the abilities of the other models we've yet to see hopefully will make up the difference. If you've got anything else to add, please do feel free to get involved in the comments. I will certainly read them and continue the discussion. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.